Yes, guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. Newcastle 2, Tottenham Hotspur 0. We're out. We're out of the got Monster Munch dust all over me. We are out of the Carabao Cup at the last 16 stage. A really interesting game. Lots to sort of chew through, but I'm probably going to keep this one fairly short and say fair play to Newcastle. I think they outclassed us. I do. I see a lot of people saying, trying to take the positives. I think there were some positives. There were a lot of positives from a Tottenham fan's perspective. If you were looking for more from open play, which I think a lot of fans have been over the last couple of weeks, then I think you saw it. I think for me, the front four, I think they connected the dots pretty well tonight. I thought that Berghvall had his best game from open play for a while. I thought it was quite instrumental in linking a bit more chemistry, bit more wavelength. Well, I think a lot of the things that Tottenham fans have been looking for that have been dissatisfied by the output being good, but the input factors being a little bit bland, a little bit negative, a little bit frustrating, and sort of criticizing the fact that Tottenham have been looking for the most part away from home this season in the Premier League, at least from set pieces being their catalyst for chances. We didn't have any of them today. We had two. I think we had two corners the entire match. And I said this all week. I said I think that a smart manager will probably take note of the fact that for the most part, away from home, Tottenham's sort of double pivot don't really progress past the halfway line unless we either have a sustained period of horseshoe football at the top end of the pitch, or unless we win a throw-in or a free kick or a corner kick, a set piece, essentially. And I think that those things can be templatable. And I said that. I think that a smart guy like Eddie Howe would be able to sit there and say, listen, let them cross the ball in. Let them do it, because they don't progress enough people up from the midfield to really cause that much havoc in the initial first phase of a transition. So let them do it. And I think we did that at times today, and we didn't really have too much in the way of output. Again, I think that when you play Richalison in the 9, that Tottenham's natural tendency is to play to his strengths, which is obviously in the air. He's not naturally known for his footballing skill set. Well, I'm not going to be too harsh on him, right? But despite the fact that he missed, 2 or 3 chances, I think he had 2 headers that were soft headers that he could have put into the corner and we would have got back into the game. I think he also had the 2 crosses from Berghvall in the first half, that one of them was in front of him that he didn't get to, and before that he had one that was whipped in as like an out-swinging corner from Berghvall as well from the right-hand side, that he ran past it and it sort of went behind him. So on a different night, a different player maybe, or just a different set of circumstances, maybe Richalison could have got us back into the game more than he did. Well, at halftime, guys, I thought it was 1-0 to Newcastle. I thought we were banging it. I said to the guys in the WhatsApp group, the next goal will dictate the rest of this game. If we get the first goal or the first chance, or it can stay 1-0 for the next 15, 20 minutes, and then we can bring on the big guns, then we're banging this game. If Newcastle, get a second goal, and they could have done, they went 1-0 up early in the game, and they could have got a second goal. They had 2 or 3 chances that were probably more gilt-edged than anything we created, to be honest, and they didn't take them. But they got the second goal early in the second half. Voltemade, 6'6". I don't think he's going to find too many headers that end up with being goal-scoring opportunities too much easier than the one that he got for his second goal. It does beg the question whether or not Kinsky, who looks far more composed, far more complete with the ball at his feet than Vicario does, but shot stopping of late, Vicario's been fantastic. Kinsky, I think you could make the argument that the on-form version of Vicario that we're seeing right now would have done maybe better. But listen, I'm not going to sit there and be too downbeat about this one. I think you just have to sort of shake hands sometimes with the reality of the situation. I think as a Newcastle, if I'm watching this as a neutral, as a Tottenham fan watching the game, sometimes when you don't have the ball, you're not necessarily watching always what Newcastle or the other teams are doing with the ball. You're watching what your team is doing without the ball. And when you have the ball, you're watching what your team is doing with it. And so you can come at the kind of game from a sort of a compromised perspective where you're just reflecting on your team's efforts. But if you were to zoom out as a neutral, I think you should probably land on the reality that Newcastle were superior in the midfield, superior with the ball, and their passing was far more slick. And for every micro moment that Tottenham had the ball and did well with it, which should be celebrated because it's far more impressive. Some of the things we did tonight with the ball were far more impressive than what we've seen in open play away from home and at home at times, to be fair, with the ball. So it's a step in the right direction from that regard. But actually, if you were just a neutral and observing which team did better with the ball and who created more chances, then I think that the only reasonable outcome here is to sit there and say that Newcastle were a fine-tuned and, you know, well-oiled version of themselves versus ourselves. For me personally, like, I think that most Tottenham fans will probably maybe be a little bit disgruntled with my reaction here, and that they'll say that we were more worthy than what I'm giving us credit for. But I genuinely think that Newcastle had this sort of sewn up. Once they got the second goal, it was pretty much game over. We did create chances. We created 4 or 5 half chances. As I say, a lot of them fell to Richalison. And look, I knew it was going to be difficult. I would make the argument that even if we went full strength, and there was a lot of debate the entire week around, do we prioritize this tournament because it's one of 2 tournaments that we can realistically win, or do we worry more about the Chelsea game on the weekend because there's rivalries and we need a good performance at home and Thomas Frank needs to get something? And so is it better to keep those, you know, the bigger guns that we have fresh for the weekend? I personally was rooting for a stronger team tonight. However, I look at the starting 11 of Newcastle that left a lot of their talent on the bench. And I would say that even if we had taken a 1 or 2 goal, I think we would have needed to have been 2-0 up at halftime to have then been able to have dug deep and been able to gone back to our relatively solid defensive structure to be able to keep out the inevitable changes and the chances that would have been afforded to people like Joelinton and Gordon and, you know, etc. As the game sort of dragged on. That wasn't required. I think Newcastle had a very relatively comfortable evening, if I'm entirely honest. And it's a little bit sad because, you know, I think that the game has moved into a direction where physicality and athleticism and size and strength matters more than it has done in previous seasons. And look, Tottenham are a beneficiary of being prepared for that kind of inevitability. But Newcastle United, when you look at the sort of squad that they've assembled, fair play to the Newcastle fans, fair play to your team. You guys are very well set. You're very well set. You're very well organised. Even the big guys amongst you have the ability to control the ball very well. And I think that your man Voltemade is absolutely sensational. I said it in the summer that, you know, there's going to be a team that gets hold of him, and I really hope it's not a rival in the Premier League because he's a unit at 6'6". He can win easily aerial duels, but he also has a very crafty and a footballing IQ that's pretty pronounced. So, you know, Tottenham could do with a player like him for sure in our frontline options. But look, what I would say, guys, as I say, as a Tottenham fan, the positives are that I thought that, you know, there was a better distribution tonight in a world where we didn't have the option to, or we didn't have the ability to kind of throw caution to the wind through our set pieces like we usually do. Even if we had have won, you know, 10 corners like we normally have done in the Premier League away from home, would we have had the same sort of outcome, the same sort of successes against a team that has players like Dan Burn that are 6'7", Voltemade 6'6", Joelinton, I think he's 6'4", you know, who's coming off the bench, etc. I'm not sure it would have been necessarily the right tactic to assume that we would get those micro moments, those micro minutes, but we didn't get them anyway. Just quickly, what I'll do is I'll run through the 11 and say how I feel about them. I thought Jed Spence had a really good game tonight, playing at left back. I thought he was his best offensive performance in a Tottenham shirt, getting the ball and trying to run into space and create things. I thought he was very impressive. I thought Kevin Danso playing tonight sort of moved over to the left-hand side. I haven't had a bad word to say about Kevin Danso for a long time, forever really. I think he's always been pretty solid as a debutant when Romero's been out injured. Today on the left-hand side, I thought he was poor. I thought he was really poor. I thought he was out-bullied, out-bodied. I thought he was out-positioned. by Nick Voltemade throughout the game. And I thought I think it was his worst performance in a Tottenham shirt, personally. I think he also gave the ball away with the ball at his feet. Next to him, Palhinha. I didn't think Palhinha did a bad job. He's being shoehorned into a centre-back role, so what more can you really ask? And again, all of my thoughts here, like I say, I'm not too negative or downbeat, because as much as I'm sort of sad that we gave up an opportunity to maybe, to do a little bit better, if we were just a little bit more clicking, a little bit more, sort of clinical, then maybe we might have been back in the game, but it wasn't to be. As it stands, Palhinha playing at centre back. Okay, I thought he was pretty good. I thought he was okay. I thought he was okay, to be honest. And I actually thought Pedro Porro, given that Pedro Porro had to take on people like Dan Burn, a left back running down, the size difference at times from the back post crosses was insane. I thought Pedro Porro had a relatively okay performance. I thought Bentancur was okay again tonight. I thought he was. Obviously, the midfield battle was generally lost, but I didn't think he had a horrendous game. It wasn't sensational, but it certainly wasn't horrific. Pape Sarr was a little bit disappointed with. If we were looking at Pape Sarr, and I think right now Tottenham fans are going to be looking and comparing a lot between Berghvall and Pape Sarr and saying, who is it of these two similar profile players, which one is the right one to get the minutes when we have to go into this sort of direction? Then I think today the answer was obviously Berghvall. He was given the license to be a little bit more creative, and I thought he was far more fluid. I thought he was responsible for most of what we created in the second half of the first half and the first minutes of the second half. I thought he was pretty impressive. I liked him. He's running around like not so much like a headless chicken, but he had intent. He had ambition to sort of show his worth. And in and amongst the sort of difficult midfield battle with Joe Willock, etc., and Tonali, I thought he handled himself when he could. Again, this is coming from a Tottenham fan perspective that's looking at the Tottenham side more than maybe a neutral would look at and analyze the overall situation. If I'm entirely honest, zooming out from that perspective, Newcastle United had a fairly easy night at the office, if you like, and that's a disappointment, because you know what, the last 16 of the Cup, Newcastle now go through to the last 8, and given the other performances and the other results, they might get a decent draw, and then they can find themselves in the semi-final to defend a cup. And Newcastle go from being potentially a team that hasn't won a cup for 50 years to being a team that wins, or that wins and then defends the same trophy in 12 months. I think I'm torn. I'm torn on my overall kind of analysis here of Thomas Frank's starting 11 and his substitutions. Did he make the subs early enough? Did he have one eye on Chelsea? Of course he did. How many options did he really have? Archie Gray today, we know, he's gone down for at least a month, maybe 2 months, with an injury to his calf. We know we have horrendous injuries elsewhere and everywhere else on the park. So he's not going to sit there and cry about those injuries. And so maybe because he's not doing it, Tottenham fans are more likely to kind of forget about that reality. Newcastle have, I think, 4 or 5 players out from their first team squad injured, and 1 or 2 of those people are players that weren't really participants in the first 11 anyway. Maybe 2 or 3 are. Tottenham missing probably 5 or 6 from a first 11 choice perspective, if we're honest. So it's a difficult conundrum of how to handle this particular performance when the fans don't want to go out from the cup, and there's the fans that did go have to travel a long way. You have to keep that sort of stuff in mind. You also have Chelsea on the weekend. You have Manchester United and Copenhagen up next week, and then after the break, you've got Arsenal, PSG, etc. So it's I understand that it's not an easy circle to square, and I was okay with the first 11. And I think that we created enough chances that on a different day, if those chances were taken, then it might have gone a different way. We maybe could have taken the game to penalties. But that wasn't to be. It wasn't to be. As I say, I'm not even going to sit here and say that Richalison had a stinker, because my expectations of Richalison are kind of fairly limited. He could have done better with his chances, but I think that some of the chances that were created were moves that involved him being a part of the build-up to, which I'm not accustomed to expecting from him. So I'm torn between sort of throwing the bus and saying throwing him under the bus and saying, typical Richarlison, we need so much better. And we obviously do need so much better. But some of the chances that he didn't quite get on the end he was actually instrumental in the build up to. So I saw better from him, but then also saw his limitations. I thought Brennan Johnson actually had a decent first half as well, who's someone that I also don't particularly rate. I thought Xavi Simons, yes, he did make a couple of mistakes. He overhit a couple of passes and a couple of pop shots. And at the end of the second half, at the end of the first half, he had a shot that should have gone to a corner kick, and maybe we could have got that one in last second, etc. Whatnots, and who knows how these things work out. But from an open play perspective, my perspective was that it was better. It was better from the front four. If you are someone that was really unhappy with the fact that Tottenham are winning in certain games or not losing, but not really creating anything from open play that is meaningful, and therefore you're kind of tolerating decent output because the input is so poor. Today, I felt like at times we created the best versions of our input factors for a while. And that's at least something to be a little bit positive about. It's at least something to be positive about. I'd love to know your thoughts, guys. I really would. But listen, we lost 2-0. We're out of the cup. We move on. We go to Chelsea. We have Chelsea at home on Saturday. And hopefully we can bring some of our first team back in. But, how I would leave you with this question. For those of you that were saying last weekend, and I was probably one of them, saying I feel a little bit dissatisfied by the output being good, but the input being so boring and poor. At times tonight, and again, I'll caveat that by saying that I thought Newcastle were by far the better team, and as a neutral, you would obviously observe that when we did have the ball, when we did create chances, it was probably the best in moments that we've seen for a while with the ball during open play from that front four, but we came away with nothing. So does that change does it in any way affect your relativity, the ratio of what you deem as important? Prettier football, better from open play, or would you go back to what we saw against Everton, which was essentially nothing from open play, drive out corners, set pieces, and go from there? And can we do that against wily managers? And I genuinely do think there's a question to ask there, whether or not managers like Eddie Howe are going to sit there and see Tottenham's strengths and tell their team, as much as it sounds counterintuitive, let them cross the ball in from open play in quick transition when they haven't got the time for those double pivots to get forward and to join the attack. Let them cross the ball in. Because if you've got a decent couple of centre backs and a good enough goalkeeper, then you can just snuff it out. If you let them get the corner, if you put the foot in front of it and it goes out for a corner kick, set pieces become a problem, and Tottenham are a problem from set pieces. Eddie Howe didn't allow that to happen tonight, and I think that's quite telling. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Like, subscribe, and comment. We're out of the cup, but we'll move on. Chelsea next. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.